JSHP is one of the world's largest high voltage transformer companies in China. They're getting their transformers put all around the US. Somebody somewhere looked at one of these transformers and was like, this ain't right. And they dissected that thing and they found the ability to basically shut it off and destroy it remotely from China at a moment's notice. The same company that we know that are building back doors, they're selling like hotcakes in the US and the utilities are installing them. If we don't fix at least this stuff, there's no coming back. We're not coming back from it. If there is going to be a nuclear war, it is going to be an EMP nuclear weapon. World War III will be fought in the electromagnetic spectrum. It will be fought with this type of weaponry. With the EMP attack, you can win a war on day one. You take out a country's ability to feed itself, to communicate, interstate trucking, no water, no sewer. 90% of the population would be dead within the first year. Not a lot of people are tying the pieces together and really seeing the mushroom cloud that's on the horizon.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Today on the channel, we have back once again Jonathan Hollerman, who's the Deputy Director of the U.S. Task Force on National and Homeland Security, #1 best-selling author on preparedness. He is a grid down consultant. He has a business called Grid Down Consulting. We've talked in the past about various security considerations for preppers. I would encourage you guys to check out that video. It is rather extensive and highly informative. He's also a former military SERI instructor, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape, and a member of the Secure the Grid Coalition. So today we're going to talk about grid vulnerabilities, microgrids, what we can expect perhaps in the next 4 years. He'll share his thoughts on the Trump presidency and whether or not the threat level has declined, or whether it's the same, or whether it's increased. I guess we'll have to hear his thoughts on that. Maybe a little bit about geopolitics, and he has some information to share with us about Chinese transformers. You're going to want to stick with us to the end of this video because he has some important information to share. So what do you think? We haven't spoken probably for several months. I don't think any of us, we really didn't know at the time whether or not Trump would become the president. What are you seeing in your consulting with respect to the industry, with respect to people's attitudes towards preparedness since Trump won the election?
Well, Trump is a great savior and all is right in the world now, right? No, I'm kind of joking. You know, I'm kind of joking. I'm kind of not. It is. I saw this happen back after Obama, when Obama got into office. Business of mine boomed. It was the end of the world. You know, the EMP attack was coming tomorrow. Obama was going to ruin everything, right? And then we had Trump come into office, and it's like, oh, you know, we're perfectly safe. Nothing bad's going to happen now, and business dips, and then, you know, Biden gets in office, and then it's the end of the world. It's just so. The last time I was on, I shared. I work with high net worth families and help them prepare for a long-term collapse event. And about a year ago, I have never seen in my business. I mean, I was flying every week. The people that I've been working with for years, like all of a sudden, everybody wanted it done by November before the election. Everybody thought Kamala was going to win, and you know, everything was going to go bad. And then, you know, Trump gets in there, and then everybody's like, okay, we're good now. And so my point is yes, it is better. I'm very happy. So first off, Task Force, we're a non-political organization, but I'm happy as far as the Secure the Grid Coalition and looking at grid security. It is a good thing that happened, but it does not lessen the threats and the risks involved with grid security.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, especially, and not to get overly political. I mean, people have mixed opinions about the cabinet that's been selected, but you have several members of his cabinet, be it the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, or the Secretary of State, all of these people who are slated for the position. There's no guarantee that they'll get it. Pete Hegseth, Lee Stefanik, Mike Huckabee. Tulsi Gabbard is probably the only one that really stands out as perhaps going against the grain of the neoconservative bend. So, you know, I think that we probably shouldn't hold our breath. We should hold people accountable and I'm going to say, be a little, I don't want to say pessimistic, but be realistic with respect to our expectations about things. And the world is still an incredibly precarious place that's on edge on pretty much multiple fronts. And I think it's unrealistic to just imagine that these threats are going to evaporate just because, there's a new boss in town.
Yeah, so I actually met with Senator Waltz there just 3 months ago in his office in D.C. talking about grid security matters. So again, when I look at who's Trump is picking so far for the most point, man, he's picking great picks from my perspective as far as what we're looking to have happen, right? So Mike Waltz, great pick, national security advisor. Pete Hegseth, I mean, that would be a godsend. He is very up to date on grid security and the threats that face the American electric grid. I believe he will make that a top priority at the DoD, which I want to get into a little bit in the military bases and what we should and shouldn't do. But so far, the people that Trump are putting forward are good. We have we hope to further the conversation with these men that we have worked with in the past. So, but we really need to focus on what I believe needs to happen is a lot of the people, and again, none of us are funded, the Task Force, Security Grid Coalition, Resilient Societies, these organizations that are trying to convince the government to take this threat seriously and harden the grid. They always focus long term. To have a completely hardened American electric grid, I mean, that's a 10, 15-year plan at best, right? If we started tomorrow, if we did a Manhattan project, maybe you get it done in 7 or 8 years, but that means that all the ducks would have to line up in a row and everything would have to happen just right. So what happened in the previous administration, and it's been 5 or 6 administrations now that nothing's been done. So this isn't really a Republican-Democrat thing. But when Trump was in office, the Chinese transformers, which we'll discuss in a bit, he put out an executive order saying, absolutely not. We're putting the kibosh on that. And then Biden's first day in office, he got rid of all Trump's executive orders, including that one. So all of a sudden, this Chinese transformer company that's building backdoors and transformers, it's all of a sudden selling transformers in America again. Like, hey, who cares? So that's the type of stuff that happens with this pendulum swinging back with politics left, right. It seems to be swinging further and further. So my big concern, and a lot of our organization's concern is, what can we get done in 4 years? Because this long-term play of hardening the entire American electric grid, we may get that ball started. There's going to be a lot of research and a lot of things that take time to get the infrastructure started. We may be just kicking off in 4 years if everything works. Hegseth, Mike Rogers, the Senator Rogers, Senator Waltz gets in there. Mike Rogers, too. He's part of our group. And Ron Johnson. If we get some of this stuff moving, what could happen is that pendulum could swing back. We could get a Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or somebody that's really concerned with climate change or this or that. They could come in on day one and just put the kibosh on everything we've been working on. That's a big concern. So for me, yes, it's an all, we're taking both ends of the bridge. Long term, we're thinking long term. We need to start getting these things in play. But one thing I've been looking at and been doing a bunch of studies on is like military bases. I think we could get 10 or 12 rural is the key word. Rural military bases, hardened small nuclear reactors, small modular reactors, and things like that. We could get a lot done in 4 years. We just have to have the initiative and the cojones to kind of pull the trigger and press forward on a lot of this stuff. Yeah,
and just to kind of be clear, because I know we're going to get a little bit of pushback in the comments with respect to some of the cabinet decision. You're saying with respect to these guys' interest in hardening the grid, that is, with respect to what you're doing, in that respect, they're better. Not necessarily with respect to what their foreign policies are going to be.
I don't care about their personal life. I'm talking about specifically the fact that these people that he's nominating, 2, possibly 3 at this point, are very, very engaged in getting the grid hardened. So we're really excited about them. I don't know. We're not commenting on what their other policy positions are. I'm talking about just the grid security side of it. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah. No. So with respect to what can be done then for grid security, And let's just talk about why should people care at all? I mean, maybe going back to the simplest questions, because there's some people who might be wondering, like, what the hell is this? Most of our viewers are well up to speed with respect to what the effects of EMP or cyber attacks might be. But what are the vulnerabilities of our power grid? And have those risks increased or have they decreased over the since I guess we last spoke?
Yeah, so I would say I did a 2-part interview with you here last year. If you put the links down below, we spent 2 hours on this. Definitely go watch that, but I'll do like a crash course. We've got 4 major threats to the grid right now. You've got the threat of physical attack. You've got the threat of cyber attack, a large CME, or solar flare. The sun is entering its solar maximum right now for the next 18 months. We're going to be getting some pretty big bangers here as far as CMEs. We're 75, 80 years past due for a Carrington-level solar flare to hit the U.S. or to hit the Earth, I should say. And that would affect Canada probably even more so than us. So, and then the last one would be high-altitude nuclear EMP attack. And I mean, if anybody doesn't think we're not racing towards World War III, then, I've got oceanfront property in Arizona to sell you. I mean, there's all these factors, and it's easy to dismiss just one of them. Say, oh, physical attacks, that's not a real threat. Well, we've just let in a whole bunch of foreign nationals the last 4 years, a lot of them, a lot of military-age men that you scratch your head at and you go, these might be guys that may receive marching orders in the future to physically attack our grid, and they can't bring it down with physical attack. The cyber threat, I mean, that is just growing year after year after year. And on the cyber side of it, there's issues with SCADA equipment in the grid. So the grid was not built. How the grid security cyber functions is they try and keep them. They built a wall with cyber security, and as long as you're outside of that wall, you're good. But if you get inside, if you get somebody's passcode, somebody important, and get into the system, there's no cybersecurity on the actual SCADA equipment that controls a lot of this stuff. You can blow stuff up if you get inside, right? So the cybersecurity side of it is growing. That threat's growing. We have AI. We probably won't get into it, but there's some new stuff with AI and quantum computing that's coming out. That's a big security issue. I mentioned the solar flares, entering solar maximum, the EMP threat. Everybody's really focusing on Russia, and they're focusing on, nuclear war with Russia right now. I do not believe, I mean, other than tactical nukes, if there is going to be a nuclear war, it is going to be an EMP nuclear weapon. They may have better hypersonic weapons, and they may have the ability to strike us first, right? Nobody wants all-out nuclear war. Mutually assured destruction. They bomb us. They blow up, a dozen of our cities. We blow up a dozen. It's just nobody wins. And here's the point: is China wants to win. They want to be the top dog on the world stage. Russia wants to win. They want to be the top. The U.S. wants to win. Nobody wants to be the winners and the lord of an ash heap. Right. So the point is with the EMP attack, you can win a war on day one. You take out a country's ability to feed itself, to communicate, banking, interstate trucking, no water, no sewer, nothing. Nothing functions. It's a continental time machine if they destroy our electric grid, because all 16 of our critical infrastructures rely on that. We haven't got how that will affect the populace, but basically they break our country. And the DOD's already told Congress 25 years ago that if the civilian electric grid comes down, the military bases, 99% of their power comes from the civilian electric grid. They run out of power in 2 days. They back up diesel. They run out of power in 2 days. They run out of food in 4 days. Okay, they will not be able to respond. We can't fight a war. So the future of warfare is combined arms warfare with cyber attacks and nuclear EMP, which is actually considered cyber warfare by most countries in their war doctrine, not nuclear warfare, because you don't actually blow anything up. The nuclear EMP is detonated 300 kilometers up in the air. You might get a flash, but there's no radiation. There's no immediate death other than the mass casualty event. And so the last point, how it affect the people, it would be 90% of the population would be dead within the first year. Again, societal collapse, complete collapse, cholera, dysentery, diseases, No fresh water, no septic, no heat, no AC. The big one is no food. And I have a 122-page white paper I did for the military called Grid Down, Death of a Nation, the psychology and physiology of human desperation and starvation. That's free on my website. It's griddownconsulting.com, the research tab. And they might be able to get through you. I know you've showed it here before, but I recommend everybody download that, read that. It's free, doesn't cost you a dime, and understand how this type of scenario would affect you personally and how it would affect your family, and make the appropriate plans to respond to that type of event.
I like what you said about the cyber security component of this, in that while there are air gap systems, meaning that there are, some protocols in place to prevent outsiders from having access to this information, there's nothing to stop a spy or, somebody who was on the Russian or the Chinese payroll or something to that effect, which we should expect is happening right now, to become an electrician and work for one of these companies and, embed themselves within the industry, because this is not like a high security industry, I presume. Is it? Like, can anybody just go and get a job working on, in a nuclear power plant or in one of these aspects of the power grid? Or is there like a vetting process that goes beyond the usual, here we call it bondability in Canada, where you get a background check? But is there anything beyond that typically goes into these jobs? Is the grid, I guess what I'm trying to ask is this viewed as a national security issue by the electrical companies themselves?
See, that's the problem, is that the electric utilities say that's a national security problem. That's the government's job to fix it. And the government says that's an electric grid problem. That's your job to fix it, right? So it's a which came first, chicken or the egg type dance that we've been doing for 25 years. But yes, it is 100% is a national security issue. As far as hiring practices, I don't know every independent electric grids or electric utilities hiring practices. Yeah. If you want to work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, or work at a nuclear power facility, yeah, absolutely. There's going to be, obviously, you're going to have to go through security protocols depending on what your job is. The utilities, maybe at some certain level of engineer, there might be some security protocols. I am not aware that there are any security protocols. But here's part of the problem is, we've talked in the past, I'll just reiterate briefly, part of the problem is in the U.S. here, we have two organizations called NERC and FERC. I know it sounds like a Sesame Street skit, but NERC is a North American Energy Reliability Corporation. FERC is a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So FERC's, think feds, NERC, think industry, okay? So NERC is their overarching their self-regulatory arm of their industry that sets their standards, right, and writes their protocols. FERC is supposed to be a federal agency, an unbiased, supposedly, agency overseeing NERC. The big problem is the electric utility industry is the only industry in the United States that has no federal oversight, legislative, authority. So FERC can't make NERC do anything. They tell NERC all the time, hey, there's a security issue here, and NERC can take it or leave it, right? And you've got a whole bunch of companies that make up NERC, right? And not all of them follow it. Each company writes their own critical infrastructure protection standards, SIP standards. They write their own security standards. And here's the crazy thing. They enforce their own security standards that they wrote. And if they break one of their cyber or their physical security standards, they're required to turn themselves in to their own industry, to NERC. And then NERC sets the fine, and then they pay that fine into their own lobbying coffers and right back into their own industry. Now, the electric utilities have spent over $1 billion, that's a B, billion dollars in the last 10 years lobbying in Washington, D.C. Only pharmaceuticals have them beat in D.C. So they spend more money than big oil or any other industry because they're unregulated, because they can kind of do whatever they want, and they want to keep it that way. And I kind of understand it from a capitalistic perspective, but at the same time, that every critical infrastructure relies on that one industry. If that's the case, there should be a lot better security standards. The government should have some say into those security standards and what you're doing to the level you're hardening things, your cybersecurity standards. But they really don't. And that's the really unfortunate thing with the U.S. here and where we're headed. But on the cybersecurity side of it, you're right. I don't even think you don't even have to. It's not like Cloak and Dagger, MI6 anymore, like Mission Impossible movies where you have to come down through the rafters and plug a USB port into the computer. The hackers are already in our system. That's another big issue. The going back to 2014, Admiral Rogers, who was head of U.S. Cyber Command, you can go to C-SPAN and watch his interview with Congress. They were in our system 10 years ago. And he said that's the one thing that kept them up at night is cybersecurity of the electric grid. And he said he told Congress they have the ability to press a button and flip the switch on us anytime they want, talking Russia and China, possibly Iran as well. They're the fourth largest cyber army in the world. So they have the ability to shut us off. The thing is we buy all their stuff, right? And we're in their systems too. They don't want us to shut their stuff off. So there's all this what's called gray zone warfare stuff happening. To quote, Colonel Stockenberg, there's gray zone warfare that's happening all the time, day in, day out, and we're always on the edge of war. We're always on the edge of war, and a lot of the American people, the Canadian people, don't realize that. And it's just a matter of time. We're kind of watching the Axis and Allied powers, coming together at this point in time. All this stuff that's happening, Syria and Israel, and you got all these countries are involved. Russia, Ukraine, you got China probably going out to Taiwan here pretty soon. There's just all these things that are happening. And a lot of times it's a blip on the media radar, and it's like, oh, that thing, and then that thing. But not a lot of people are tying the pieces together and really seeing the mushroom cloud that's on the horizon, pun intended.
Absolutely. So is it the same in China and Russia in terms of the nationalization of their utility services? I presume that they're more in control of the systems there and perhaps do take this national security risk more seriously than we do over here.
Yeah, 100%. China has quote unquote private companies, but in their legal system, there is no such. If the government comes into your private company and wants you to do XYZ, you do XYZ. So their electric utilities are run by the government, by the CCP for 100%. They're going back, I think it was 8 years. Don't quote me on that. China really started ramping up. There were news articles from there. There were leaks from there. They really started ramping up their hardening of their electric grid. They've got a modern electrical system similar to us, and at least in their big cities. And there was an article probably about a year ago. I released a newsletter. It was sometime within the last year. They're cranking. So if they're not done already, they're on their way to having their grid mostly hardened. You can't harden every aspect of electrical grid.
When you say harden the grid, you're talking about they're preparing their grid for like a war scenario.
They're preparing their grid to get hit by an EMP from us, okay? They're preparing their grid for combined arms warfare, cyber, nuclear EMP. World War III will be fought in the electromagnetic spectrum. It will be fought with this type of weaponry. And then Russia, their electric grid, our electric grid's old, but theirs is really old. They still have vacuum tubes and really old tech running their stuff. So their stuff is largely hardened already just by nature of it being old, and they haven't hooked up. That's part of the issue with the U.S. is the smart grid with this big push for climate change. And again, I'm not talking politically, whether you like that stuff or not. That's not the point. The point is in order to do that, I was just looking at a new article about AI grid initiatives, and it's almost like we're building Skynet from Terminator, but they're combining all this stuff, and we're pulling power from here to there, and we're storing it there, and peak efficiency 24/7, shutting down coal power plants, building solar farms. All this stuff, smart homes, smart meters, all of this stuff does make the grid function better. But every single thing you do like that makes it way more vulnerable, makes it way more susceptible to these types of things. So we're talking about when something happens and it gets broken, whether through cyber, EMP, or even a solar flare, the chances of fixing it when you've got microprocessors, billions of them throughout your grid, trying to figure out which ones, you're not fixing that. Whereas in Russia, you walk over and be like, oh, the thing switched, and you pull the lever and it turns back on, right? So it's a completely different way of doing things. I'm not advocating for one or the other, but it's just the nature of the beast. The more you focus on renewable energies and the AI and smart grid technology, it just makes it more and more difficult to harden that stuff, which is one of the reasons. So I'm not going to give credit where credit's due, but the electric utilities, I mean, it's getting more and more difficult for them to harden the grid, right? When they look at this, they're like, man, that's a massive problem. We ain't paying for this, and we're not passing it on to the consumers. That's the government's job to pay for this, to fix this, right? But every time the government said, hey, we'll pay for this, we'll fix this, they're like, no, we don't want you involved. So it's problematic. The problem is the politics of this are kind of crazy, some of the background stuff, and it just doesn't make the media. People don't know that tomorrow your lights could go off and your faucet stop working, and it's never coming back. It's never coming back. They just don't even know that that's a possibility.
And so what is China doing exactly to harden their grid? And is the Pentagon, there's got to be somebody looking at this and saying, I wonder why they're hardening their grid for nuclear war. Maybe we should do the same. Or is that you guys?
Okay, so yes and no. So there are.
Maybe we'll start with what are they doing specifically?
Again, we're a nonpartisan organization. I have a hard time keeping my personal opinions out of check, but the Pentagon's a problem. Okay, the woke military, the direction our military and their generals have gone, they're all about doing certain initiatives, and less of it is concerned about hardening the military. Okay, so there are there's certain documents at the Pentagon which are very problematic for our cause that basically undermine the things we're trying to do. However, there are certain pockets within the military that are paying attention, that are making moves, that are having conferences, that are looking at this. There are initiatives where they're looking at, there's Joint Base San Antonio right now. It's a public-private partnership with Joint Base San Antonio and the city of San Antonio and the electric utility in that area, looking at hardening things. And they're testing a lot of these new technologies, okay? But from my perspective, again, this is me personally, we talked about getting stuff done in 4 years. The military, the bases that are really focusing on getting backup systems, hardened backup systems. They're bases that are like down near in Florida, and they're like power got knocked out because of a hurricane. They're like, oh, we can't have this happen, so we need to put a hardened system. And like the problem is they keep picking these big bases that are surrounded by big cities, right? So you got a military base, and you got 3 million people around that base. The problem in that scenario is if any of these events happen and right a week, 2 weeks into this thing, when the people start starving and Florida, there's a lot of guns. There's more guns in Florida than there are people, and you got 2 million well-armed people that are ticked off, and you've got lights on your base. You've got planes landing, giving you food. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see where this is headed? It's not going to go good for those 10,000 troops on that base when there's 3 million starving, desperate people surrounding them. My personal opinion is a lot of the stuff that they're looking to do, small modular reactors, small like nuclear reactors like batteries, 5 to 10 megawatts up to 300 megawatts. I've been working on a report. I haven't had a chance to finish it, but looking at rural military bases like Grand Forks. The Grand Forks, I'll just throw that out. It's a base up in South Dakota there. It's about 10, 15 miles out of the town of Grand Forks, which is only 30 or 40,000 people. But other than that, it's very rural. There's a lot of massive grain bins out there that you could protect and help use that to feed people in the future. There's train systems that connect. I'm looking at this. But if you had a small modular reactor at Grand Forks, you could power the city next to it too, Grand Forks City. So they need to be looking at these type of bases first. The problem is they don't have all the whiz-bang latest tech stuff on those older bases, and they're wanting to do all the stuff on the new bases. My philosophy is the next 4 years, let's get some fallback stuff, because here's the problem. If it doesn't get done in the next 4 years, I'm concerned that it won't get done, right? And that something bad will happen 6 years from now, 7 years from now, before we get a chance 10, 15 years down the road to actually fix all this stuff. If we can't make hay while the sun shines now, for instance, if an EMP happened tomorrow, there is, so the American people know, there is zero plan of action at FEMA, not one page of information on how to deal with the long-term electric grid. They don't even look at it.
Well, look what happened in, what was it, North Carolina?
North Carolina, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was one small region of the map. I mean, could you imagine? And they knew it was coming, and they mustered whatever forces they could.
Right.
And they still couldn't.
And they have planes operating. There's telephones. The email systems are working. They can send bank money back and forth. They can do all this stuff. After an EMP, there's no banks. There's no interstate trucking. You're not moving stuff around. Excuse me. So there's a lot of this other stuff to look at. There's no plan at the government. There's zero plan at the military. I was part of the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force here 5 years ago. That was brought in, as an outsider, as a joint services thing, at looking at a 3-day wargaming event on EMP. There's no plan. No, they've got no plan to deal with any of this stuff. And so people think that someone's paying attention. So you mentioned, like, isn't somebody at the Pentagon looking at this? And it's kind of like, no. I mean, they're looking at DEI initiatives or this or that, or they've got other things that they're focusing on. And this isn't one of them. And that's a very frustrating thing for us, because we're like, none of this other stuff that you're doing matters if you can't feed people and if you can't give them fresh water and heat and air conditioning in their house.
And so what exactly then is China doing, like, specifically? Do we know anything about the specifics of what they're doing?
I'm sure, depending on Nate, you and I aren't going to find that information. I'm sure there's somebody somewhere that's looking into what they're doing. But yeah, because it's their government doing it, I'm sure they're doing it through their military branch, their hardening. We're not going to find out. I don't know what they're doing, but I just know there are reports where they are talking seriously. They are actively hardening their grid. They've been doing it for 8 or 9 years.
Like, in general, like, how do we prevent an EMP from frying the grid?
Okay, the very first step in that process, and one of the things we're hoping to get done in 4 years also, is hardening our high voltage transformers. High voltage transformers are the step up and step down transformers coming out of big power plants, long line transmission lines, sending power from across states. They're 400-ton behemoths. We have about 3,000 of them in the U.S. today. We only replace about 12 of them, and those come from South Korea and Germany, now China, which we can circle back to here in a minute. But those 400-ton behemoths, they take about 36 months. Currently, it's about 36 months to get one to the port. So if you, through an EMP, solar flare, cyber, if you're able to melt down those transformers and destroy those transformers, you're not getting the first one for 36 months, right? So the first step, because it's actually considered America's Achilles heel by the Congressional EMP Commission, harden the high voltage transformers. From there, certain power generation facilities. There's a lot of big water, like dams, right? Dams, they were built 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. There's still a lot of those, levers and wheels and knobs. They hook computers to it, but it wouldn't take much to kind of get back to that, keep those old safety systems in play, right? So power generation hardening, and then downstream from that, you need to make sure certain connections stay functioning to military bases, for instance, to critical areas that you need to have power. NORAD, Cheyenne Mountain's independent. So at the actually substation, so the high voltage transformers, there's companies that are making there's SCADA equipment and data centers and data equipment that's hooked up to these high voltage transformers. There's companies that are building EMP hardened RF cages to keep all this equipment in, at the facility. And it's been tested. It's in play in certain states and certain areas. I can't remember the utility. I think it's in Colorado. Could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. That actually has put some of this stuff in play. So it's a multi-layered thing. When I say hardened electric grid, what I don't mean is that we're going to get hit with a nuclear EMP and they're going to flip a couple switches and, tomorrow we're turning the lights back on. We're still talking probably a weeks. It's going to come on in little places here and there, because everything downstream, all your stoves probably there's microchips in everything. There's stoves, there's microchips in your toaster, right? There's stuff that's going to be fried everywhere. There's millions of small transformers on the power poles that are going to be fried. We're talking an enormous rebuilding process that could take years. It would be disastrous. People are going to die. Don't get me wrong here. People are going to starve. It's going to be very ugly, but we will rebuild. If you don't harden any of this big infrastructure, like I said, it takes 3 years to even get 12 of them a year on our shores. If we don't fix at least this stuff, there's no coming back. We're not coming back from it. So that's the thing is looking at this organically. What are the most critical phases of the grid? If we can get a lot of that stuff started in 4 years, but the previous administration that came in after Trump, like for instance, Trump was going to build his border wall, right? This is a political statement, wherever you fall on that. But the point is he had a lot of it paid for, and I forget, I don't want to quote dollar numbers, but there was a whole lot of fencing material that had been delivered that was sitting out all along the border, ready to be installed. The next administration comes in and says, we're not doing that. 2 years later, I remember reading a news report here a couple years ago that they literally, I forget, it was hundreds of millions, I believe, of fencing that was already at the border. The next administration came in and sold it for scrap metal, pennies on the dollars, just to prevent it from happening in the future, right? So this is the kind of stuff the American politics do, both sides of the aisle. Don't get it strange. So whatever we start, we need to make sure we get it legislatively, try and get it so it continues to move forward.
Well, that's one of the benefits of having what we term authoritarian regimes where there's one person in power indefinitely. You have the ability to make those long-term decisions. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and the Ayatollah, they can all think 10 years from now. And that's an advantage they have.
It absolutely is. As far as security, you get better security with that type of government, but there's drawbacks to it as well.
Well, I always say, they're more prepared for SHTF, but typically the quality of life when times are good is not as good, right? Now, with respect to this Chinese transformer thing, we're hearing now that the Chinese have banned, I think it is, what are the rare earth metals? So we can see that a trade war is likely on the horizon, a tariff war is on the horizon. That is going to increase the level of vulnerabilities with this particular situation. I mean, if we think it's bad now, imagine if we are at war with China. Okay, it's one thing to take 36 months. It's another thing for that not to be an option at all. So how do you think, and this is going to be a little bit of speculation here, but how do you figure that this upcoming trade war with China is going to further complicate the United States and North America, and I guess just the West in general's hardening of their grids?
The Chinese have been infiltrating our universities and our tech for a very long time, to the point where it's kind of laughable how easily they can get embedded at certain tech places, how easily they steal some of our best technology just over the last 20 years. So China is not our friend. As far as the trade war that's coming, I regularly say, we live in what I call a post-truth world. It's hard to know what to believe and what not to believe. Everything you read online, somebody's coming at it from a perspective or a narrative. Fox News, MSNBC, BBC, don't matter where you get your news from. Somebody's at the top there, and they're coming at it from an angle. So it's kind of almost funny when you start listening to one side talk about how amazing this trade war is going to be for the U.S., and then you hear the other side say how disastrous it's going to ruin everything, right? So it's really hard to decipher that. I'm not an economist guy, but as far as how it affects the actual grid security itself, my golly, man. The Chinese have entered the fray with their Chinese transformers. About 8 or 9 years ago, JSHP is one of the world's largest high voltage transformer companies in China, and they sell transformers all around the world. And they entered the U.S. market. Previously, we got all of our high voltage transformers, this critical infrastructure, from Germany and South Korea, like I mentioned. They enter through California. They start a company. They JSHP there as well. And the utilities start buying transformers from them because they're selling them at a significant discount. Okay. We're not even sure if they're making money at this point, but they're getting their transformers put all around the U.S. to the point where a fair sized chunk of New York City and Las Vegas at this point, electricity flows through transformers from this company. Back when Trump was in office, I believe it was 2019. I have to be careful what details I give here, but let's just say somebody somewhere looked at one of these transformers and was like, this ain't right. This thing ain't supposed to be on here. This ain't right. And so the next transformer that came from that company was confiscated at port by Sandia National and by the government, sent to Sandia National Laboratory. And they dissected that thing and they found the ability to basically shut it off and destroy it remotely from China at a moment's notice. Okay. So now all of a sudden, hey, it may not be a good idea to keep installing transformers from this company in the US. So Trump signed an executive order, said, absolutely not. There's no more transformers from China that are going to be installed in the U.S. It affected some of the other critical infrastructure, some of the parts, some of the tech we bought from China as well. Biden's first day in office, he got rid of that one as well. So the same company that we know are building back doors, and there's other stuff there too. They're doing other stuff with these transformers. They're like going gangbusters. They're selling like hotcakes in the U.S. and the utilities are installing them all around the U.S. So it's really frustrating. There's a guy named Michael Mabey who ran gridsecuritynow.org. Don't go there because the website's down at this point. He was kind of the tip. He was on 60 Minutes here last year. He had been doing FOIA requests for bills of lading on these transformers. He had been tracking them. I think he got up to like 441 of them, large transformers that he had found. And so he did this FERC filing, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So he did this filing with all his data saying, hey, look at this. This is a big problem. These Chinese transformers that it is on record that they're building backdoors in these transformers, and we're putting them in everywhere. And so the politicians got involved. They went to the utilities and was like, what the heck? And so the utilities, I've been tracking this every time NERC comes up to or the Congress, and they're sitting in front of Congress. There's always some senators, again, both sides of the aisle, that are hitting them like, okay, so you're supposed to be looking into these Chinese transformers that are all around the U.S., and every time it's the same lip service. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. We're very concerned with that. We're looking into it. It's been like 2 or 3 years now. They keep looking into this problem. I think it's a fact that they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And remember how long I said it takes to replace high voltage transformers? The idea of taking, and not all these were HV, some of them were just large transformers, but it would take years to replace them. And they'd rather, and this is what we see with utilities, they'd rather put their head in the sand, pretend the problem ain't there, and just hope it goes away and nobody's going to ask questions, instead of trying to figure out, oh my goodness, how do we get all this stuff out of the system and replace it with American-made stuff or stuff made in Germany or something. So it's really problematic. Last point on that is that FERC filing, after a year of sitting there, they finally denied it. So the feds denied more information to Michael May. They denied the fact that there's a problem there, even though it's footnoted, it's hyperlinked, it's a long report proving what's going on in the grid, and they don't want to face it. So unfortunately, Michael Mabey, like everybody else, he'd spent a good chunk of his wife's grocery money, more than that. He spent a lot of money over the years fighting legal fees, FOIA requests. He finally said, I can't do this anymore. You know what I mean? And so he packed up, and we got a lot of his documentation at a couple other organizations. So it didn't go to naught. But here's where we're at, Nate. We need people to help in this fight. We need people that are willing that have experience filing for requests. We could use some legal guys to help us, sift through this mess. If you're a media guy that's watching this that wants a pretty cool story to talk about how the Chinese are infiltrating, we got a lot more data we can share with you on this. We need people in marketing, and if you go to emptaskforce.us, securethegrid.org. join the fight. If you can financially help, these are 501c3s, you can donate. But if you got time and you got some kind of area of expertise you think you can help us out, shoot us an email. Tell us what you can do. Tell us how much time you have, and we'll put you to work. Because right now, this is David and Goliath. The utilities have unlimited resources and power. Every single politician, both sides of the aisle, take money from the electric utilities. And so it's an uphill fight. We could use help and reach out to us, get in the fight and help us, get the grid hardened.
Yeah, I'll definitely post those links in the description. I'm actually surprised they ever took an initial look at it in the first place. Like, I'm surprised that they, the one transformer there where you said that they discovered all these back doors. What was it that compelled them to do that investigation, and why is that no longer a thing?
So it's like highly classified. We only know certain things that came out. We know I'd have to pull it up. I can't remember their specific names. It's been a little while since I've read reports, but previous national security advisor came out on record saying that there were backdoors built into these. I believe it was a Washington. If you can look at Chinese transformer Washington Times reporter. I'm trying to think of her name. She's done multiple investigative journalist things on these a couple years ago. But the point is like the media, it's a big story. It's like, holy cow, this is problematic. This is a bad thing that's happening. We should probably look into this, and we should probably stop doing this. We stop doing it, and then we start doing it again. The problem is the media is not coming back out and recovering it. Do you see what I mean? Like, it's still a problem. The problem didn't go away. It's just we're 35, 50 news cycles down the list, and nobody's thinking about that problem anymore. But we are. We're like, this is the height of insanity that a company that's owned lock, stock, and barrel by the Chinese government is building transformers that we know they're building backdoors in and other stuff. And we know that same company is operating out of California, and we're literally letting them do it in the name of the almighty dollar. It's just the height of insanity.
It's an incredibly disadvantageous position when the Chinese have a hardened grid and the ones building are completely non-hardened, vulnerable.
Yes.
It's like as unbalanced as it could possibly be. So you have these 441 transformers. That's
the ones we know about. And that report's over a year old. So I'm sure there's a lot more, because it kept increasing. They kept putting more and more and more every year. We don't know the last year because Michael maybe's not around to do the FOIA requests and do the investigative journalism to find this stuff. And we've only got so many people to work on this stuff.
I'd like to be optimistic about this, but unfortunately, I think until something happens, I mean, the government, for them to, unless you get somebody in a position of power, a senator, maybe one of Trump's cabinet, maybe Mike Waltz will be the guy in order to start bringing awareness to this particular topic. I don't see anything happening. I think something has to happen first before there to be any movement.
Yeah, I'm going to knock on wood, and I pray to God it doesn't, but it may take an event, Nate. It may take an event, something bad happening.
I do think you're well positioned to be a potential, you guys as the EMP Task Force, obviously, you've been there, you've been doing the research for years. There's been some opportunity there where you've been able to get the government's ear on these things. But I think if and when that thing does happen, I'm sure they'll be looking to you for guidance on these issues. So at least it's a silver lining for you, I guess. But unfortunately, let's just hope that the event that does happen is on a manageable scale. You would almost, be better off if something did happen on a manageable scale before the big event happened, right?
Yeah, man, I gotta be honest with you. The problem is if we don't get certain people that are aware, like Waltz, like Hegseth, like some the proper person at the head of CISA. If we don't get the certain people and at least one from that's really knowledgeable, what happens is someone to come in and the Trump administration, and our organizations have met with Trump before. We've met with Governor of Florida. Anyways, DeSantis, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Wow, brain malfunction. We've met with all these guys before. They know, but they only know 30,000 foot. So what they'll do is they'll put somebody in charge of like, man, we need somebody to look into this. Trump's serious about hardening the grid or, grid security. And he wants to finally take this serious and make some headway. And what will happen is that some cabinet person will be like, oh, okay, let's talk to the electric utilities and find their best guy. And you'll get a NERC guy. You'll get a lawyer from one of the utilities in that position that's got the right connections. That's what keeps happening. Trump had executive orders at DHS, come up with a plan. He gave them 12 months, I believe, to come up with a plan. And so basically it took them 18 months and it came back. It was 4 pages long. And essentially, I'm paraphrasing, it says, we need to do more studies. We need to look into this. This is serious, but we need to consider. And it's just like we know what we need to do. There's organizations, there's industry that they know how to harden this stuff. They're just not doing it, and they're kicking the can down the road, and that's what keeps happening. So the problem is the deep state. Now I'm not talking about weird, but I'm saying there's electric grid insiders at the Department of Energy, in the Pentagon. They have their own fake science that they put forth. If you don't get the right guy at the head of the snake to bring people in, the right people in, organizations like ours, organizations Secure the Grid Coalition, Resilient Societies, Dr. Radasky from Meditech. I mean, there's brilliant minds that were part of the military hardening strategy going back 40 years. But if you don't get the right people, they're just going to put more electric utility retirees in there, and the problem's going to get worse.
So we've talked a lot about what we can do to try to encourage governments to take this issue more seriously. What can individuals do? I recently installed I think it's a 25 kilowatt hour or 25 kilowatt system on my property solar system, and it's got a very elaborate inverter, battery management system, which I presume is probably quite vulnerable. I mean, with the exception of building a Faraday cage over the entire thing. What can an individual do? Because quite frankly, as a prepper, I'm not holding my breath for the government to fix this problem, right? So I'm trying to, in the very least, get prepared myself. And I know you've written lots of books about this. This is something that came up in the past. What would you recommend in terms of hardening one's own power grid? Is there, I know there's a few devices. I think we might even sell some, actually. I haven't actually used them on my own system. But do you know of any, is there any considerations?
So there is one company called Solarc, SOL-ARC, or ARC, I think, Solarc. They're the only company I know that has actually had test data to support their hardened solar system. It's a basically, think of a Tesla Powerwall, but it's made by another company, and it's in that whole system. Everything's in one system, and that's hardened. Okay. Then you run into issues with BMS and lithium batteries. Everybody's doing lithium because it's far better than lead acid or some of the old AGM type batteries. But the problem, there's basically microchips inside that battery. That's a problem. So if you're looking at lithium, like LiFePO4, make sure you have an external BMS and have backup BMSs in a Faraday cage that you can swap that system out. I'm not going to say them by name. There are certain civilian companies out there that say if you plug this thing in here or there, it's going to protect you against EMP. Be very leery about some of these companies. I'm not going to say them by name, okay? But just be careful what you're buying into. Let's put it that way. I think the most important thing that people can do, everybody says the sky's falling, the end of the world is nigh, and I need to run out and buy a bunch of stuff and shove it in my basement, right? I think the first thing you need to do is understand what's coming first. I talked about that free report on my website. Again, download that, read that, understand what this world looks like. That's the key thing, is you have to understand the battlefield you're planning for. And a lot of people don't understand the effects of psychology, the effects of starvation and human desperation has on the human psyche, and how people are going to react to these scenarios. So you ask for recommendations. That's difficult. I mean, that's my business, but it's difficult because the advice I'm going to give somebody that lives in the suburbs of downtown Atlanta and the person that lives on the side of a mountain in Idaho are going to be radically different. My recommendations to these two different people, right? And so it depends on your financial abilities. How big's your group? I mean, are you trying to bring everybody in the, brothers, sisters, cousins, and you got 40 people you're trying to prepare for? That's difficult. The average human eats 2,000 pounds of food a year. That's a metric ton. So if you're, trying to make preparations for 20 or 30 people, you may need 30 metric tons of food stuffed away somewhere. Now, if you'd stuff that 30 metric tons of food in your basement and, in downtown Toronto, okay, people are going to figure out real quick, or they're going to figure out at some point that you're the only person not getting skinny. You're the only person not freaking out. There's some food smells coming out your window in the summertime. So be smart about come up with a good plan first, is my point, before you start throwing money at it. I work with a lot of really high net worth families and groups and even companies. Plan B, fallback plans for different organizations and people. And I much prefer to come in early in the system when they're like, oh my goodness, I'm concerned about this. Help me buy 3,000 acres and build a system. I'm like, oh, can't wait. A lot of times people fly me in and they were like, oh, I did this 10 years ago during Y2K or 20 years ago or whatever. And you come in, you're like, you know what I mean? Like it's harder to fix things after the fact because they didn't have the proper mindset. They didn't understand. And what I'm saying is, like, maybe they had this, I've had clients that have spent multiple millions of dollars on bunker systems and all kinds of things. And, their house is visible from, a 2-lane highway between two towns. And I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, if you would have only bought a property 2 blocks back, you would have been good.
And this is why I'd encourage people to go and watch our other talk about the security considerations, because this is a much, broader issue. And I would encourage people for the next 4 years, I always say, you want to buy low and sell high. And the same thing is with prepping. You don't want to start prepping when everybody's panicking. And that's kind of the situation for the last 4 years. If there is a brief reprieve from global hostilities, know that that's certainly not the end, and you should seize on that opportunity to, have people like yourself who perhaps have a greater availability. I'm not saying you will. I quite frankly don't think you will, but if you did, and if the prices were a little lower, seize on that opportunity. This is the time to do those big projects. Consider this an opportunity to, we got a little bit more time. We bought a little bit more time. Maybe, maybe it's going to be the complete opposite. It's going to go in complete other direction. I'm not really, we're still, it feels like January 20th, every day is like a week, depending on the, what's in the news cycle that day. So I would just encourage people to really seize on this opportunity. Go and check out Jonathan's website if you want to book a consult. What's your schedule looking like nowadays?
I have a lot of projects that I'm working on, so I really limit myself to how many people I work with, just because I'm just one guy, and I've got, I volunteer time at the task force. I've got books. I've got other irons and other fires I'm trying to, and I homestead. Our family homeschools. I got kids, so I am busy, but I am, let's just say, my schedule's freeing up here at the end of the month because a lot of people are just, I'm finishing the big projects that I was working on, and not a lot of people have been reaching out the last month and a half.
Well, all right. Well, when Elon calls me, he calls me every other day, and so when he calls me next time, I'll let him know that you can help him out.
Yeah, put a bug in his ear for me.
Just kidding. All right, I'll do my best to send some people your way, Jonathan. And guys, go and check that out. Thanks a lot for coming out, man. And I'm going to post a link to your YouTube channel that I know you haven't been actively uploading recently, but I'm hoping that you'll do so more frequently, because people would definitely like to hear your perspective on these things and any sort of news updates you have with the EMP Task Force. I think that'd be great. And if people want to help out, those are the links. Go check them out and perhaps, make a contribution.
Thank you so much, Nate, for having me on again, man. I really appreciate it. And your last advice was really, really important. Don't wait till the last minute. If you wait till the last minute, everybody's trying to do the same thing. So don't go and cash your kids' college fund in either. You know what I mean? Like, be sane. My company model is prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and let God do the rest, right? So, take this one step at a time, practical steps, be wise, and, don't let fear operate your preparedness either.
Excellent advice. All right. Thanks a lot, man. Good talking to you. Take care.
You too.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.